Hello, hello, and welcome. If you are interested in learning acrylic painting, you're in the right place. My name is Jessie Robertson, and this is Keep It Colorful. Now, in today's painting tutorial, we are working on this little spring scene featuring an adorably curious duck wandering through a meadow of wildflowers, and there's dragonflies flying all around. This painting is all about capturing the feeling of a soft spring day, and we'll capture that by using really loose and expressive brushwork in the grass and in the flower field, and a more neutral and pastel palette. And by neutral palette, I mean we're not going to use these rainbow colors saturated right out of the tube. We're going to mute all of the colors that we use so it's more of a landscape, traditional landscape style palette. We're also going to work on building this little duck. We're going to use simple shapes, a grid, and a range of softer values so that these feathers feel really soft and natural without really overworking the surface of this duck. We're not going to paint every individual feather, that is. We're going to use some brushes that just capture the texture by the nature of the brush itself, kind of already having the shape of the feathers. Around this little duck, we're going to create some lively little grasses, tiny blossoms in pinks and whites, and we'll use some really fun visible brushwork and really playful mark making to really create this sense of spring atmosphere and movement. You'll see how a really loose approach to painting foliage and flowers can create a sense of both life and energy without needing to paint every single detail. And we're going to work on building a scene where the patterns speak for themselves so that this scene feels fresh, light, and full of spring. Now, don't forget that this tutorial is absolutely free to watch for the next 7 days before it moves into our Kick Academy vault. If you'd like lifetime access to this class, like if you need more than a week or just want to keep it for lifetime access, you can tip to own individual classes on my website. They're all a few dollars. Everything is between $5 and $15, or you can join the Kick Academy. Now, the Kick Academy includes this class, as well as over 650 other detailed step-by-step tutorials. We also feature fun creative challenges, like our sketchbook challenge, where we work to fill a 30-page sketchbook together, 1 page at a time. If you're interested in trees, I have a tree painting challenge, which takes a detailed dive into tree shapes and forms, a cloud challenge, move mountain challenge, and more. And it's a really wonderful way to keep your creativity flowing and continue building your skills. If you are already a Kick Academy subscriber, this class is already in your library and ready for you to revisit anytime. Now, if you're ready, let's go over our supplies and then let's get started. So first and foremost, you're going to need something to paint on. Today, I'm working on a square canvas and the size is 12 by 12 inches, but please feel free to use a different size substrate if you prefer. You can paint this in a sketchbook. You can paint it on canvas board. Acrylics really adhere to anything that is porous. So it won't stick to glass unless you use a special medium or a special additive into the paint, but it does stick to anything that's a little bit more fabric-y or porous like wood or stone. So you have a lot of creative substrates that you can use. Now for colors for today, I've squeezed mine out on the palette here. Feel free to use your own colors at home. There's just 2 colors that are specific for one of the mixes we're going to make today. So I'm going to go through the palette starting up here at the top. We'll be using burnt umber brown, ultramarine blue, turquoise blue, and if you don't have turquoise blue, please use a nice greenish blue like phthalo blue or cerulean blue. Green deep permanent, and if you don't have green deep permanent, feel free to use another cool green like phthalo green. Hooker's green, which is a beautiful grassy green. We have 2 yellows here, cadmium yellow medium and cadmium yellow light. And for our reddish hues today. We'll be using cadmium red medium hue, as well as a more pinky red. This is called quinacridone magenta. Up here, I have equal parts prism violet and cadmium yellow medium. These two colors, the violet color is one that I really want you to have for mixing the brown color that really neutralizes almost all the colors we're using today. This purple is a very reddish purple, and I'll do a little swatch. So if you're like, Jess, I don't have prism violet, I'm going to do a little swatch. It's a nice translucent purple, but notice how it's a very reddish purple. You don't want to use a cool blue purple like dioxazine purple because it will turn your neutrals gray instead of warm brown. So if you have a violet color like this, it's awesome. If the only purple you have is dioxazine purple, which we used yesterday in our little bee. So see how this bee is a really bluish purple and this is more of like a reddish purple. If this is the only purple you have, you can add some magenta to it to help warm it up. But prism violet's one of my favorite colors for mixing neutrals. So if you can get it, get some for sure. Along with paint and a canvas, you're going to need a few brushes. I'm going to show you the brushes that I used, and I'll hold them up close so you can root through your collection. And if you don't have the exact same brushes, that's fine. Just approximate the bristle shape and size. Brushes for today include a number 12 flat brush. This is the big rectangular shaped brush. It is 3/4 of an inch wide. Very soft for blending. Also for blending in our backgrounds, we'll be using a mop brush. For the smaller details today, we'll be using a brush called a round brush. I have two here, a number 1 and a number 0 round. And if you're new to painting and painting sizes, the smaller the number of the brush, the smaller the brush. Though between different brands, so a 1 is always bigger than a 0. But some brands might start at a different size for 1. So this is a number 1 in Princeton. A number 1 in another company could be a different size. That's why I always hold them up for you. So a little and an even littler round brush. Along with those, you'll want a 1/4 inch flat brush like this. And I do list all the supplies that I love in my Amazon shop in case you want to check them out. I typically use really popular and established artist brands so that they should be easy for you to get, whether you're in Canada, the US, or even in the UK. A 1/4 inch angled shader. For our textures today, I recommend a wisp brush. I love this cheap little set. It comes with 5 sizes, but any wisp or grainer brush you have will work really well. For some of our fine lines today, I recommend you have a script liner. I'll be playing with 2 fan brushes, a big old bristly fan brush like this, as well as a smaller acrylic fan brush. This is a fan brush in the size 10-0. It's not essential that you have a palette knife, but I did use my embarrassingly dirty palette knife, which I should have wiped off while it was wet. But I did use a palette knife and that long thin edge to help tap and pull up a few of the grasses in here. So if you don't have one, you can just use another small brush, but I really love mixing different texturizing tools when it comes to really expressive patterned backgrounds like this. That's it for brushes. So just a few more things that you might want to have on hand. We are going to be using a grid method along with, I'm going to show you how to draw the duck in basic shapes. Combining breaking a duck into basic shapes like an oval and a circle, with using a grid where we can look for points on our grid to help make sure our scale and proportions are accurate, is really helpful for being able to draw almost anything just by looking at relationships. So because we're going to do a grid and we're going to practice breaking this duck into just a couple shapes together, I suggest you have a ruler and something to draw with. You can draw with any old pencil that you have. All right, I don't have a standard pencil, but here's a 4B, just a regular graphite kind of pencil. Or you could draw with something like this. This is a watercolor pencil. And this is lovely because watercolor can merge in with the acrylic paint. So if I draw this duck and this really pretty, for instance, kind of reddish brown watercolor, the drawing, I don't have to erase it, will just kind of bleed in to the paint around it. So a pencil, watercolor pencil, or even a chalk pencil, we'll be drawing right on the white. So you will need a color other than white to sketch this on. If you have a color swatch book, grab it. If you want to practice sketching this duck with me before we put it on our canvas, grab some scrap paper. Two more supplies I never paint without. My trusty dusty blow dryer. This is a little travel size blow dryer, and this will help control the dry time of our layers in between steps. And last but certainly not least, I always bring along a spray bottle full of water. I use a glass palette to paint on, and acrylic paints can dry really quickly, especially if the heat or air conditioning is on or it's just dry in the air. So I mist the top of my paints very lightly every 15 minutes or so, and it keeps them hydrated for hours of acrylic painting fun. That's it for supplies. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and let's get started. And we are going to start by drawing this little fellow. So what I recommend is let's take a look at sketching a little duck in basic shapes. And then I'm going to show you how to use a grid for even greater accuracy. So I'm going to snuggle in, grab some scrap paper with me, and I find the more I draw something, if I've never drawn it before, practicing a few times on some paper like this makes me feel a lot more confident before I put it right onto my canvas. So the shape we'll start with is just an oval, and the oval, and I'm going to draw really light to start, and then we can darken it up a bit. And the oval will be leaning up a little bit because the duck is kind of, in a walking, standing position. So we want that oval to be up on a little bit of an angle. And again, we're going to use a grid method later so we can get the exact angle, but let's just try this in a few basic shapes to get a bit more comfortable. So the body will be an oval, and I'm going to draw a line kind of along where the chest area is, just a bit above the oval shape for the body. We're going to do a circle shape for the head. And I looked up the definition because to me, a white goose and a white duck, they just look so similar. And I really want kind of accuracy when I'm drawing. So ducks just have visually less vertebrae in the neck, but within ducks, some ducks have longer necks, some have shorter necks. So we won't stress too much, but at least, one head width above the body. I'm going to go about here. So we want to make sure the head's not coming further out than the chest. We're going to stop about here. And then we're going to draw the neck down, kind of straight from the back to connect into this oval. And we're going to do that on both sides, kind of like this. And then we're going to do a few little details into the face of this duck. wherever I put a line kind of coming out like this is going to be the angle of the beak. And we want to think about dividing the head into quarters. So I'm going to start like this, and I'm going to extend the beak out. And I'm going to do a plus sign to really divide the head into about 4 quadrants like this. This represents the beak. And then we can just do another little shape like this for our beak. And where the beak attaches to the face, the chin's going to kind of come in a little bit from the neck. It's going to kind of round out into the upper breast and then up into the bottom of the beak like this. So we're going to just shape up what we've got here. And then the beak itself, there's a little detail here. The eye is going to sit in the upper left-hand quadrant right here. So just to the left and above this line. And then the beak will come up and into the face like this. And we want to think about maybe flattening the bottom of the beak a little bit. And I'll often kind of pull the forehead down onto the bill. I keep saying beak. It's a duck bill, right? A little something like this. So we're already getting a duckish shape here. We'll want to do a little bit of shaping on the breast as well. So do you see how it kind of comes down from the neck and then it angles down, almost flattening out here before it angles up at the tail. So we'll want to think about angling down, and then we kind of flatten off a little bit down here and angle up at the tail. So I often use straight lines just to represent that shape. It is actually quite curved, but sometimes it's easier to understand angles if we can reduce them into these straight lines before we then, we'll round it out when we fill it in. So now let's connect the back to this little pointy tail. And now we're starting to look a little more duck-like as opposed to just being a straight oval. The feet will come down from the body here, and I just do a little line to represent the feet at first, like this. And the wing, when you're ready for that wing, let's take a peek at where the neck is meeting the back first. And let's make it a little bit more gradual. So I'll often kind of just come down and maybe angle it down a bit, kind of taking it so it's a little bit more rounded into the back, like this. And then that wing will stop before the tail here, and it sits about right here. So it's almost like cutting the body in half, angling up so this angle kind of matches the little duck bums, which are possibly the cutest bums of any animal bum because they waddle. And when we go to paint this in, we will add some tufts of feathers, coming up from the little duck bum, and some tufts of feathers coming up from the little duck wings. And we'll talk about more details into the duck later on, but this is the basic shapes. Ovals, we're going to round out the body, and we're going to use a grid to help us create a little bit more accuracy in the shapes. But I want you to think oval for the body, circle for the head, connect into the neck, bill comes out, here's the wings, and here's the legs. There's my really quick duck doodle. Right, I see a quick comment from Cindy who says, I ran out of ultramarine. What can I use instead? You can use cobalt blue, Cindy, or you can use a bit of magenta into a cerulean blue, or if you only have phthalo blue, just think about making it more purple. So take a phthalo blue, add some purple or magenta to it. So we're going to go ahead and sketch a grid right onto our canvas. If you're working on a 12 by 12 inch square like me, it makes it nice and easy to measure, which is why I choose this shape a lot. We're going to come in at 4 and 8 inches. So 4, 8, 12, dividing this into 3 little sections. And let's do the same thing towards the top, and then we'll line it up and we're going to create some vertical lines. So putting little taps at 4 and 8 inches. And then connect these up. Whoop. And we're going to do the same thing now horizontally. 4 and 8 inches. Over here, 4 and 8 inches. And let's come across. I know we have some amazingly educated duck people watching today. So I think this is just called, I know mallard is a name for a duck, but I'm pretty sure white ducks are just called mallards as a species. Is that right? I need a duck person to help me out with my breeds. We're going to apply the same grid to the painting. So we can use both basic shapes and points along the grid to really help us place things. And you can lay a grid over any photograph that you're working from. So if you have a duck and if you paint this, you can use this grid technique by tracing a grid over any photograph you have. Just make sure the canvas size is the same ratio. So if your photograph is a 4 by 3, you're going to use a canvas size that's 4 by 3, and you can place a grid over it. And we'll look for points. Points in what we call both positive space and negative space. So positive space would be like looking at the duck. And if I were to cut this segment where the duck's head is in half, I can see that my duck's face sits right in the left-hand side of this segment, and it's really helpful for placing those shapes. So that's looking at the positive space to help us place our drawing. We can also look at the negative space to help us out. So that's where we've got this little curve right here and this little area of sky in behind. So we can also look at the negative space to help us. I'm going to put one more line here through the middle since it is really helpful for placing the head. I'm not going to use a ruler. I'm just going to lightly sketch this on. So we can see that the head, if I were to cut this in half again, and now this upper square is a quarter, the head sits in, you can see where it sits in that lower quarter. So if we were to come up like this, we know that we're going to represent our duck's head as a little circle shape that sits about here. So take a pencil or a watercolor pencil and sketch a little circle on right here for me like this. Now we're going to take a peek. Now that we've got the head, let's take a peek at the body. And again, we can look at this little bit of negative space. I'm going to put this little line, turning the center into kind of a little plus shape as well. So we've got these 4 little squares in the center, like this. And in this square, in this upper left-hand square, we can see the little curve that happens. It's almost like a shape like this. So I can kind of try to match the shape. It ends here and it swoops up like this. So that kind of gives me a nice indication of the duck's neck. And we know that the back of the neck starts to follow the face down like this. Now let's continue on with the rest of the body. So let's look at the back of the head. The back of the head comes down, and let's look at where the body ends on this line right here. So if I look at this line, I'm looking at this line just right here. The body ends just below the halfway point. So if we've cut this square in half, the body ends about right here. So I can start swooping down the back of my oval like this. And I'm going to reduce this. I'm not going to think about those feathers. I'm just going to reduce it to a line. I know the line's going to continue down into this square over here, and it ends. If I look at this line here and I cut it in half, I'm looking at this line here, the little point in half, the top of that oval kind of ends about there. I've got this little triangle of feather. And then it swoops on an angle down with a little bit of the feathers kind of sitting. I've got this little triangle of positive space of the white duck right here. So I've got that as a point of measure. And then as we come towards the center line here, got the little angle, and then it kind of starts to flatten out under here, doesn't it? Like this. And then the body really swoops up, and I'm looking at it kind of chopping off this little corner like this, just giving myself some points, and then we basically can just kind of connect the dots. So you can see the basic shape is an oval, and we can use points along these lines to help us assess where the duck's body sits within the grid. Now, if we make a mistake with our watercolor pencil, what I do is I just draw lightly at first, and I had the chest really come out, and I really wanted to end at this line here. So I just redraw the lines, and it's really sketchy like this. So now let's take a peek at the beak. We can see the beak comes down, and just a little bit of it sits at the tip of this square here. So it really kind of comes down on this sort of angle into the tip. And I'm just going to do that thing where I cut the face in half, looking at the angle of the beak, thinking about drawing a line kind of straight through where just the tip comes into here. And then we can do the plus sign like this. And this really shows the angle that the little duck's head is on. We know the eye sits in this upper left-hand quadrant right here. Okay. And now let's take a bit of a closer peek at the beak. We're going to shape it up a bit more because this drawing is a lot bigger than on the little paper here. This was just to kind of feel a bit more confident with the shapes. It might look a bit wonky. Here's where we're going to really clean it up. So the duck's beak, we want to add a little bit of shading into the face. So they almost have like little cheeks. So I'm going to take the side of my pencil and I'm just going to do this little line right here. And do you see the shading on the face there? Kind of like a little cheek, like almost like this area here. It's like a little cheek, kind of darker under the head, like this. And the beak, remember the chin comes out a little bit, and actually angle the whole face in just a little bit. And the beak will kind of taper from the head down like this into a little point, and it's going to be a bit flatter on the bottom. And at the bottom, bring it right into the head a little bit. So the line, the chest here is kind of coming up to meet it. The bottom of the beak's a bit flatter, then round it up and pull it up towards the top of the head. And I want you to make sure that your duck's head isn't like this. It's not like a big bubble. It's pretty flat at the top. Just gently round. And again, you can draw that little square. I'm going to do this plus sign here. And you can look at the negative space around my drawing here to really see the shape of the duck's head. We've got more space on top, this thin channel of space down the neck. And now the bill is going to connect right in to the face. So we've got this little shadow here, kind of at the halfway point. And the beak is going to have a little curve like this. And then flat at the top. So flatten into the face, and we can just kind of curve it down like this. And that little eye right here. There'll be a little nostril towards the top of the beak right there. All right. Loretta Jean says this is a Peking duck. Okay, thank you. Our Peking duck. And I see Peggy who asks if a baby duck is the same design if I want to add a baby duck. I taught a similar class to this last year, Peggy, with the 2 baby ducks. I actually think I made this to be a set with the baby ducks. So if you want to check out the baby, it was called Spring Ducklings that we did last year. It's a great reference for your baby ducks. We're going to come down and look at the feet, and I'm going to look at this square. I'm going to cut it in half like this. Like this. So you can see that the feet come down about halfway in our painting here. And if I were to cut the lower square in half vertically, like we have that line, you can see the feet, where the feet sit in this little square here. So if I were to do a little plus sign through the lower half, I know that the legs don't quite hit this line. They sit just a bit behind it, right about here. And they're going to come down on a bit of an angle. I'm going to represent the foot, which does come over this halfway point just a bit, as a little shape like this. So it's a little webbed shape like this. And there'll be a little area where the leg comes up into the body like this. There'll be another leg just in behind here. Little foot, webbed foot. And now the wing essentially cuts the oval shape of the body in half. So I'm going to look at about half. Here's that wing, and it's going to swoop like this. I can see it just kind of creating a little swoop right in this area. So I'm just going to swoop it up a bit. And the wing kind of will close up in the body, and we'll represent that with some shading. There'll be lots of shading under the belly and under the wing. We can do that little pull of the tail up here too. And now this is pretty much it for the drawing. Sometimes I'll do a little line to represent where we want the grass to meet the sky. So I wanted a little dragonfly right underneath the duck, like kind of like right here. Boop, 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 boop. So I wanted to make sure that my grass kind of arcs down a little bit. So I'll sometimes give myself a little wavy line like this, just so I can put a little dragonfly right there. And on the other side, the grasses come kind of up to the duck's back a little bit, and I'll be sitting about here. other than that, that's it for the drawing. Feel free to pause this video and zone into this drawing or practice this drawing on paper as many times as you like to feel comfortable with it. As a line drawing without much tonal variety, it tends to look a little bit funny until we get the different values in it, or that range of the darkest colors to the lightest colors, which really helps give it a sense of form as opposed to just a few lines. So even if you're like, Jessie, my drawing looks a bit funny, that's okay. Mine does too. Once we get that shading in, it's going to really take shape. So I'm going to move this grid, and you can pause to practice before you sketch on. It's time to mix the colors for our sky. So we're going to mix one of my favorite neutrals, which is a mix of two complementary colors, purple and yellow. And we're going to talk a little bit about color temperature. So I'm mixing a warm yellow with a warm purple, and it's going to create a warm brown. So here's my warm purple, my prism violet, and I'm not going to skimp on this. I'm going to take equal parts, at least this big. So this is like a thumb-sized dollop in both length and depth. And I'm going to mix it with an equal part yellow. So this is this warm reddish purple, violet purple, with the cadmium yellow medium, which is a orangish yellow. And you can see this orangish yellow here next to this greenish yellow here. So this one's warmer because it looks more orangey. And we mix these two together to get a color that looks very similar to the color burnt sienna that you can buy out of a tube. When we mix our own, it's really easy to get a color like this from equal parts yellow to purple, or to add just a bit more yellow. And if I add more yellow to this color, I get more of a yellowish brown. Now we're going to use this color, which is equal parts purple and yellow, and this one has a bit more yellow in it throughout the painting. I do highly encourage you to make a little color mixing chart along the way, and you can label the colors with shorthand like CY for cadmium yellow, that kind of thing. So the two cloud colors we're going to use is this color here. And I made a lot of this color because it's a base color for most of the other colors we're going to use today, this warm brown. And then we're going to add some white here. And I'm going to take equal scoops. Let's use the one that has a bit more yellow in it. Equal scoops of our color plus white. And it's going to create a really beautiful, warm, kind of creamy, taupey, pinky, orangey color. Like a light, creamy orange. So that's this color plus white. If I add a little more white, it will create even a lighter value of this color. So this is just this color with progressively more white. We'll use it in our sky and in the body of our duck. And then we have two blue colors in the sky. I'm going to mix just a tiny bit of the turquoise blue with some white. So just a tiny pinch of this turquoise blue. So I have a thumb-sized dollop of white. I'm just going to go turquoise blue has a really strong tinting strength. So this tiny amount of blue into about a thumb-sized dollop of white. We're going to fill the whole sky, so you want a decent amount of color, okay? I love this bright spring color, and I think it looks so pretty with these orangey neutrals. So this is turquoise blue plus white. I just want to show you the plain turquoise blue here so you can see how much white we've added. So this is plain turquoise blue. Add white till you get kind of a baby robin's egg color. And the final color we're going to mix is going to be a more grayish blue. So I want you to take 1 scoop of burnt umber. It's brown color. 1 scoop of burnt umber. We're going to mix a homemade blue-black. 1 part burnt umber to 2 parts ultramarine blue. So taking nice size scoops, 2 parts blue, mix it together. We're going to get a really dark kind of navy blue color, like a blackish blue. That's this color here. And I will post my own color mixing recipes after the tutorial in the supplies tab on my website. But you can also make your own color swatch cards here. So this is 2 parts ultramarine to 1 part burnt umber. Now we're going to make a lighter version of this blue. I'm going to add a little white here. We want a really kind of grayish blue. I'm going to go just the tip into this color here. And I'm going to mix some of that color in. I'm going to mix a little more. And I should be getting a nice blue-gray. So this color plus white creates a really pretty blue-gray. If it's too gray and not enough blue, just add a pinch more of that ultramarine. We'll use that homemade blue-black a lot in our duck later on, so don't mix all of it. Just a little bit of that into some white. Keep some of this blue-black color for later. I've added just a bit more ultramarine to this color. There we go. That's looking pretty. Okay, with our sky colors mixed, I'm going to give them a gentle spritz. And now we're going to go straight into our homemade black. And I'm going to use my 1/4-inch angled shader. And I'm going to take about a toothpaste sized dollop of this black, and I'm going to make what's called a wash. I'm going to drip so much water into a small amount of this color that it becomes almost see-through and really easy to create thin lines with. And all we're going to do is go around our duck to preserve our drawing as we fill in the background around it. So I want you to think about just outlining your duck in this phase. I'm going to come under the beak. I'm going to fill in my eye. I'll use just the tip. This brush is an angle, so you can use just the tip of it to sketch little parts. I'm even going to do a little bit of shadow for that little cheek part. I'm using it's watery paint. But if I wanted to get a lighter bit of shading, I would add even more water to the point where my paint's like see-through. So this is called a wash. When I add so much water to this paint that it's like see-through like this, then I can take some of that see-through paint and do a bit more of a shadow like this under my wing. Sometimes I'll take that really watery paint and come up a little bit over the wing there, a little under the face. Want to make it look a little fluffy. Take your time pulling the duck on. Once we've got this will preserve the drawing just in case we get a bit messy with our sky painting, and it will bring some shadows right into the underpainting that we can layer over with some of these lighter and mid-tone values. So we've got our shadows already painted in just by going over that drawing. Now I'm going to rinse out the brushes I mixed the sky with. I'm going to give this a little blast with my blow dryer. And then we're going to start painting in that really beautiful pastel sky with all those colors that we just built. So if you have a tiny blow dryer, let's grab it and give this a blast. All right, I see two questions. Carol asks, could I use a charcoal pencil on this? Absolutely. The lighter you draw, the easier it will be to fill in the pastel background. So use a harder charcoal pencil as opposed to a softer one. Might make that a bit easier, but charcoal works beautifully with acrylic paint for sure. And Steph says, my duck kind of looks seagull-y. With birds, they have very specific characteristics in their body shapes and beaks that can make one bird easily look like another. I'll give you 2 words of encouragement, Steph. 1, as you start filling it in, it's probably going to get a lot more duck-like. 2, Seagulls are kind of like long, lean, white seabirds. And they also have areas of gray in them. So as you fill this in all white, it might start looking a lot more duck-like. Two, seagulls have much more of a pinched, pointed beak. So take a look at your beak. And again, it could very much just be that it's not filled in with the color yet. But make sure that the duck bill is a bit more rounded at the tip and a bit larger, like where it comes into the face here. So I think a lot of that will get solved when you paint it, but do take a look at that beak, because even with just the line drawing, it should look duck-ish, and that bill has a lot to do with it. As opposed to pointy, we want it to be a bit fatter. Time for the sky. I like using a big old bristly brush, like a fan brush, to make fast work of blocking in these lovely colors. So bristly fan brush looks like this. Here's my old one that I've actually had for several decades. It's looking pretty rough and bristly. Here's a brand new one by the same company. I think it's just one size smaller, but they look pretty similar, don't they, in size? So maybe they changed their sizing. Either way, this bristly fan brush is another cheap one from Amazon that I've been using these for 2 decades. This one's about a decade old. They make lovely work of adding lots of paint and creating really loose brushwork. We're going to start with this creamy color that we've made. I'm going to take a little bit of this darker creamy color here. I'm going to start to splotch in. You can add a bit of water to your brush. And let me get a few of these on so you can kind of see where we're going to place these. You can use some of the lighter version of this color too. Wrap some around the sides. We're essentially going to have this mix between the blue and these really creamy clouds. And while we're here, we can tint this cloud color just a little bit, and it has to be the smallest bit of paint. So if you have quinacridone magenta and you were to go just the tip, so see that little bit there at the edge, if I add that into some of this creamy color, it just gives it a little subtle bit of a pink hue. It's really subtle, but it makes it more of a pinky orange. And I like wiggling a little bit of that in there too, just for a slightly different color in a few spots. But I want to leave some white space. So pull on some of those oranges. And while I'm here, I'm going to take some of that. You can use the more purple one or the more yellow one, but some of that homemade burnt sienna color. And I'm going to wiggle some of this over where we're going to pull these grasses, just so we don't lose that bit in our drawing. So this darker color is going to represent the grasses. So we're just kind of blocking in a bit of a placeholder for those, like this. And now before this, beautiful orangey, peachy, creamy color dries, we're going to add some of those really soft blues. Just in case they're too dark, we'll want to mix right on our canvas. So do make sure you've got a little pinch of white somewhere off on the corner, and do rinse your brush now. Rinse the orange off of that fan brush. Rinse, 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 rinse. I'm going to come into some of this teal, and it's looking pretty cute. I'm just going to wiggle it around this orangey pinky color, and don't worry about the neutral kind of color that they mix together as. I might add a bit of white into some of this just to make it a little lighter skies are really light, so I want to keep it on the lighter side. When I come around my little duck friend here, I just use the corner of this brush and I carefully come around, make sure there's a little color wiggled around all the edges of the duck. That's what the black is there for, to preserve the duck if we accidentally go over just a little bit. And then with the teal, wiggling around the edges of the orange. I'm going to take a little bit of this smoky blue. I'm going to add a little more white to it. I want it really light. I'm going to I added a bit more white to my smoky blue because it was looking a bit dark. I might add a few little bits of my smoky blue in a couple of spots. Now all the colors are in, and so hopefully you have a decent amount of paint. So take a look here. I know you're focusing on your work, but look at the thickness of paint. So it's like I've smoothed a thin layer of yogurt all over a piece of toast, but it's thick enough that you can see some brushwork in. That will give me a little time for softening. You can soften with this same brush, even though it's bristly. We just wipe it off and we very gently feather, or you can switch to a brush, like a mop brush if you like. I'm going to start with this one. I'm just going to lightly feather, and I'm going to wipe my brush off every so often. I want to keep some areas of color distinct. I don't want to lose all of my orange, just soften it a little bit. And at this point in the painting, you can always tweak by adding a bit more of that light orange on top. Go for the lighter version of the color. Okay. And I might start over some orange. I'm just going to push really lightly and add a bit more. When I touch it, I pick up blue. So I've got a napkin off to the side and I just wipe some of that blue off. I go back into my orange. And I'm trying not to blend areas of orange that I really like too much. This is a light touch. And if I need more color, I'm just pulling a little bit more of one of these base colors into the white. Just have fun with your sky. I want you to create a soft blend. The colors can be different than mine. If I'm doing something in my sky that isn't working for you, this is your project. So I want you to adapt and change it to a way that makes you feel comfortable and excited to paint. When you have finished the sky area of your painting, let's go ahead and rinse off our brushes, and we're going to get into the final mixes of our color. And these creamy colors, this burnt sienna and these versions with white that we have here are going to be colors we use in our duck. And we're also going to use some of our burnt sienna into our greens to take them from a really vibrant saturated green into more of a neutral traditional landscape palette. I'm going to mix a few more colors again, like I said, using this homemade burnt sienna. I showed you how to make it a bit more purple or a bit more yellow. I always like to keep adding a little bit more cadmium yellow next to my purple here, just to make sure I can mix more if I need it. So the first grass color we're going to make a dark, medium, and light warm grassy color. So I want to show you Hooker's green on its own. It's a really saturated green. And spring days are often rainy, and we want a tinge of warmth and more of a natural green for our landscape. So what we're going to do is let's start with a large scoop of our Hooker's green, big thumb size scoop. And now we're going to mix in an equal portion of cadmium yellow medium. And already this green's going to warm up in a lovely way. So we take it from this plain Hooker's green. Now this is with equal parts yellow, which you can see warms it up considerably. But we want to neutralize this even more. So let's come into some of that homemade burnt sienna here. And let's start with just a small scoop like this, and just watch how the color changes. It's going to brown it out a little bit. So we've used purple. Purple has red in it. It's red and blue. The red and the purple, because red and green are complementary colors, the red and the purple is muting the green and creating what we call a neutral color. And I mix this in till I get more of an olivey green. So we've gone from this really saturated green to this olive green. So really bright, warm it up with the yellow. When we add the burnt sienna, this color, to this color, we get this really pretty neutral green. And now we're working with more of a traditional landscape kind of palette. And we're going to use some of that color just like this. So I want to keep a large amount of this color just as is. And I want to take a little bit of this color and I want to add some white to it. This will be our middle value. So the plain green will be our dark value. This will be our middle value. And if we add a little bit more white, we'll get ourselves a lighter value of this color. I'm just mixing a bit more of my yellow and sienna into my Hooker's green because I need to add a bit more of that olive green here. There we go. Green does not have a very strong tinting strength, so you need a bit more of the color to get the range. Okay, so here we go. We've got dark, medium, and our light green color. This is going to be for all the grass except for right under the duck where we have a really dark shadow being cast by the duck itself. The cast shadow of an object will be one of the darkest shadows. So you have another green here today. This is Green Deep Permanent. And first let me swatch these colors so you can see them on white. So we have our dark green. I'll just do another coat so you can see our dark olive green. Then we added a little bit of white into it. And then we added a lot of white into it. So these are the three greens we're going to use, dark, medium, and light. And for the really dark shadow color, we're going to mix one more. We're going to mix one more. Then that Green Deep Permanent, grab a scoop of burnt umber brown, and let's mix equal parts burnt umber brown with our cool green, our Green Deep Permanent. And this should be almost like a kind of dark blackish green, and it's going to be cooler, which is always nice for shadows. If they're a little bit more blue or purple. So this is equal parts Green Deep Permanent and burnt umber, and it makes a really pretty green shadow. So if I were to add a little white to this color, you can really see the hue of the color. And this will be the range for all of our grass. And let's go ahead and start blocking that in now. We'll go dark, middle, light value, and we'll call this our shadow. So dark value, middle, light, shadow. And let's actually start with the shadow. And we can grab any old brush, but one like this little bristle fan. And I'm going to start pulling a little bit of a shadow right under the duck. And a little bit more on the right hand side. And I'm going to go back to my bristle fan, and we're going to move from the shadow value into the dark value. And let's start using this fan brush, and we're going to wiggle some of these greens. I'm kind of coming right over where we had that burnt sienna color. I'm just softening this a little bit into the sky here. And the nice thing about the fan brush is I kind of wipe most of the paint off. We can just kind of pull up a little bit, and it starts creating this texture like this. I'm going to wrap some around the sides. So back into that dark olivey value, and I'm just kind of coming right over where we had used that sienna color to establish where we wanted the grass to come up to. So I'm going to put on a nice amount of this green like this. I'm going to scrub my brush off on the paper towel. I didn't use water. I'm just going to scrub it off a little bit, and you can hold this brush in different ways. So you can pull up like this to create texture, but you can also hold the brush vertically and tap or wiggle around. It doesn't get the finest brush marks like the smallest grasses, but you can even pull down into the color and just start carving in some little textures right in over top of the shadow too. You'll notice if like my shadow's looking a little patchy. That's because greens are always a little see-through. Remember how much green it took to tint the white? It doesn't have a strong tinting strength. So keep it soft where it meets the sky. And I want to take this shadow color down in the corners. So we've got a little bit of light hitting in front of the duck here and a little bit dark kind of on the corners. So I'm going to pull down. This isn't the shadow color, it's just our dark color. If you run out, just grab a scoop of your sienna and some yellow, mix it right into that hooker's green. The ratios aren't important, and something nice about mixing on the fly can be that it adds a bit of variety into our grass colors, which always looks nice. So remember, it's just yellow, burnt sienna, and that can be kind of in any ratio when we mix it into the green. If I add more of the burnt sienna, it's going to be more orangey, which can look really nice. Rinse off that fan brush and tap it off on a napkin. We're going to go into the light green next. We're working fast and loose because we want to blend some of this in pretty wet into wet. So now we're going to do this light area. Pull it in. And if I pull up with my fan brush, you can get some fun little textures in there. If I go into the darker color on the side, I can pull it over, because every time you touch a color, we transfer it. So I've got some light on my brush, so if I kind of come up here, it will transfer that light color up, and if I touch this dark color, it will pull some of that dark color down. I don't want to lose my areas of light and dark, but I do want to kind of integrate them together. And we can do other fun stuff, like we could grab a brush, like a whisk brush like this. And as long as you can kind of see the prongs in the brush, it will continue to make texture. So I'm going to add some of the medium texture into my dark texture. And it's subtle, but look at this. Kind of, we can even mix an in-between color like this. So I'm pulling, letting the colors kind of merge together. The whisk brush is fun for pulling like this, but we could also turn it up the vertical way and tap, and it makes little marks like this. If you lose your shadow entirely, just go back into the really dark green we made, especially under the lower right side of the duck. I've lost my feet a little bit, but it's worth it to get a nice blend in the grass. We want to pull a few blades of grass right up into the edges of our painting. And one of my favorite ways to make little grasses in a really painterly pattern, and again, instead of painting every single blade of grass, we're just looking where the lights are, and we're using brushes to help create that pattern for us. And that's one way of painting loose leaves, to think of the overall pattern, as opposed to painting every single mark and letting the pattern do the work for us. You can take a palette knife, any palette knife, by the way, and you can look at the long, skinny edge of your palette knife, like this. And I'm going to tap the edge into the paint, and I'm right-handed, so I'm going to tap this side when I want to come this way. If you're left-handed, you might be wanting to use your palette knife in a bit of a different way. So kind of make the motion with your hand see how you can best tap up in and load the side you're going to put down. I'm going to go for not my shadow color, but maybe my medium color. I might mix a bit more of that medium color. That olivey green plus some white. And I'm going to tap the knife in. So I've just loaded the tip. And I want you to try tapping up. And I like to be pretty messy with this, so I tap up. Some people have a hard time with the drag like this. So try tapping up, and you can start lower. Like you can start down here where you can easily paint it away. If this is a new technique for you, before you start coming up. Start somewhere non-committal is always my recommendation. That's what I do when I'm like, I don't know how this will turn out. I practice somewhere it's a bit easier to cover up. I'm going to tap some of these up. I want to have some dragonflies right next to the duck. So I imagine two little circles where my dragonflies are going to be, and then I just kind of stay out of that area. I'm going to load the other side. Remembering I want a little dragonfly right here, so I'm going to try not to put anything right here. Instead, I might come over here. You can try the drag, and don't worry if it carves into the paint as well, because that also helps create texture. But you can also try the tap. So tapping up, tapping down. And again, you can use a lighter color, or you can go right into a darker color if you want to do some darker stems in here too. Why not? If I ever feel I've gone a little heavy with my palette knife, I'll take a brush like this mop brush. I don't want to lose all texture, but sometimes I'll buff it out just a little bit. And the mop brush itself, so if I were to take a color here and pull up, it's if I push really lightly, it too will create its own texture in here. And I want to do one more thing while I'm down here before we get into that duck. I'm going to take some of that creamy color that we made, just a little bit, on my mop brush, our burnt sienna plus white. I'm going to add just a little bit. I want this highlight to be nice and light, and this, bringing some of this sky color into the grass can work on creating a nice harmonious color composition. And I can flick this up with my mop brush. If I want it blended, I push a little harder. I don't care what texturizing tools you use to integrate this in. We just want the light right under the duck, and slowly kind of integrating the light into the longer grass strokes along the side. When you feel happy with your grasses, and here's mine, an extreme close-up. I've got some palette knife marks on here, some softer blends, but even in my softer blends, I try to keep pulling in the motion. I think that maybe this duck was lying down in the grass. Some of the grasses are curving around him. He's just exploring spring, looking at dragonflies, nibbling on flowers and plants, eating bugs, which I know they love to do. So I've just kind of tried to bow the grasses in the direction I think they might go after a duck might be laying in them. I've got some pretty thick paint on here. I love up close, you get all these little worlds. And sometimes after it dries, I'll add a few little grasses. Again, just kind of integrating some of the light and medium colors over here. But I'm going to leave it like this because we are going to place some flowers. And every time we add a new element like a flower, it will change the painting anyway. So we'll do our final tweaks in our grass after we add these little kind of pink, white, and yellow daisies. It's time to pull in the underpainting in our duck. We're going to work from a very traditional style of painting called dark to light, where we bring in, we already have some shadows, so we're going to bring in some more middle values into our duck before adding the white at the very end. So the duck's going to look a little funny in the underpainting phase. It's going to have blues and creamy purples and creams, and we won't have any of the actual white highlights until the final coat. So we'll do this duck in 2 coats. I'm going to switch our color swatches back to those duck colors, which will be these. We're going to use a little bit of our grayish blue into some of the shadows here too. And for now, I want you to go ahead and rinse off any of the brushes that you used in your green grass. Rinse, rinse, rinse. And then tap them off on a napkin, get them ready to roll for the next step. We won't be mixing any more colors, but I do want to show you a thing about color temperature with the sienna and how we can use that sienna and why I love making my own homemade burnt sienna. So we started with equal parts here. So this is equal parts prism violet and cadmium yellow. Then we added a bit more yellow and we got more of a yellowy, creamy color. And with color temperature, we mentioned it in the grass. We used our cooler green, our more blue green in the shadow. So the same thing with the duck. The light source is coming from above and in front and a little bit more on the left-hand side. So, really hitting, obviously, the neck's creating a shadow here. We're going to use the more purpley colors and blue colors in the shadows away from the light, so under the wing, under the belly, and then the middle value is the more warm creamy color. So I've got to mix. I'm going to put a bit more purple here. So this is the color that has more, this one has more yellow in it, but if we were to add a bit more purple to this mixture, so the equal parts purple and yellow, when we add that to white, it has more of the purple undertone. And they're both cream colors, but we want to use the one that's more purple in the shadows and the one that's more yellow in the brightest highlights. You can accentuate that by adding even more purple. So if we added white to this color and then a little more purple, we can accentuate that even more. So any combination of the prism violet and the yellow equal parts creates more purple. You can accentuate the shadow by adding even more purple. And if you add a bit more yellow and white, then we get a really lovely warm color, which we can use at the top of the wing. Now the other color that we're going to be using is the kind of blue-gray we mixed. I like adding just the tiniest tip of prism violet in there as well, into some of this blue-gray. And if you want, you can add a bit more ultramarine as well. But I'm taking this blue-gray color and I'm adding a little bit of this purple, maybe a bit more ultramarine, like if it's super gray. But I want to have this really pretty violet color, this purpley blue-gray, as some of the deepest shadow areas. So if you have a brush, like an angled shader like this, I may take some of that purple color. And here's more of the yellowy creamy color. Okay. So if we take a bit more of the purple color, like this color here, we can bring a little bit of that under the belly. And then this little part where the leg comes off here. I'll have some of this purplish color under the chin. Maybe under the wing. Like and we're not going into the blue color just yet. This is just this color mixed with white. And then let's take some of the more yellow version of the color, the more yellowy cream color. And we can start coming on top of the wing. And I'm going to pull some of that yellowy cream color down here. I'm going to use some of that yellowy cream color. We'll pull the white on top, but in order for it to look feathery, we've got to start with a bit of a darker color underneath. I just want a bit of a distinction in these more neutral shadow colors. You can keep them soft together. We should be able to still see a little bit of our underpainting showing through as well. Let's take some of that more yellowy, creamy color into the face. Into the little cheek. And I'm going to go into some of the more purpley shadow color. And that little area under the eye. And some of the yellowy shadow color. So the yellowy shadow color is kind of going where the white will be eventually, But in order for the white to have distinction and not just look like a solid mass, like if we want to get that little feathery texture, we've got to put a bit of a shadow color below. And one of the best shadow colors to choose in your painting comes from just a general light source in the painting. So we're using some of the creamy colors from the sky and a little bit of the blue and some of the darkest shadows. So you can have this nice kind of unified color palette here. Really defining this cheek. It always looks a bit funny at first. Now let's take some of that purpley blue-gray color in some of the deepest shadows under the wing. Under the lower part of the belly. And maybe even a little under the chin here. Like right here is one of the darker spots. And I'm going to take maybe a bit of this purplish color. There are the wingtip feathers down here. There's some planes, some distinctions in the feathers of the wing. So I'm going to come through on a little bit of an angle with just a bit of a darker shadow color right here, where the kind of shoulder of the wing, the feathers are a bit distinct from the bottom of the wing. And these ones kind of come right in from the body. So they kind of arc like this. And then these ones start to wing up the other way. So there's some directionality we can use in our brush strokes to capture the different size and shapes of the feathers. So with this underpainting, we can layer the whites on top. Now, while we're waiting for this to dry, why don't we go ahead and pull in some of these beautiful orange colors into the duck's bill. And into those little webbed feet. I want you to take a big dollop of cadmium yellow medium like this. And when we make a color like orange, we want to add our reds nice and slow. So I'm going to go in this big dollop of orange, it's a big thumb-sized dollop. I'm going to go just the tip into some cadmium red medium. And just the tip into my quinacridone magenta. I'm going to mix it in. And this is a nice medium orange. So I'm definitely going to keep some of this. We've got this kind of medium orange. I want a bit of a darker color as well. So I'm going to keep some of this, and then I'm going to add a bit more red and a little bit more magenta to some to make it darker. Now we have this really beautiful reddish orange, like a vermilion, which is great. Now if I want to have a shadow in the feet and under the duck, what color would we add to a red to darken it? There's a few options for darkening red, but one of my favorites is to go with a complementary, and technically this is an orange or we could consider it a red orange because it's very almost like a pure cadmium red. It's got just a titch of yellow in it. So we can add the complementary color to red, which is green. So if I take a little scoop of this really dark orange, and I'm going to go just a tiny tip into some green and mix it in. If it gets too brown, I can just add a bit more red in there. But adding a little bit of green into a really reddish orange like this makes a beautiful, beautiful dark orange. Now rinse off your brush. And let's come into some of this darker orange we just made, the one we added the green to. And let's pull some kind of where the beak is attaching into the face, coming around the cheek. I'm going to go right over that black line we put in the shadow part of the painting right here. Wipe off your brush and go into the vermilion orange you made, that kind of reddish orange. We're going to pull a little detail kind of right around the nostril, almost like a little triangle shape right here, into the beak, duck, bill. Then wipe off your brush again and go into the lighter orange. Go right over top of that black line this time. Let's fill that lighter orange in through the bill. And if it ever wasn't looking duck-like, and I know that underpainting can make it look off because of the color, but this bill should take it from looking like any old bird into a duck. I'm going to add a little bit of white into some of my lightest orange here. And we want to come right around, just tap a little bit in along the top of the duck's bill. So we're kind of leaving that little triangle of darker vermilion, but I don't want the dark shadow around the top. So I'm coming over that with the white and the orange will help make it more opaque. A little something like this, okay? Now I'm going to come into that vermilion color, and I'm going to put a little detail into those duck feet. I've just done a really simple foot come down for the leg, and almost kind of like a little triangle shape for the webbed feet. And then I'm going to use that darker orange where we added some green into it. Take a little bit of your lighter orange and let's define the top of the foot. I want the top of the foot to, the lower foot's going to come out a little bit larger than the one in behind. And the one in behind, I just kept a really, really dark reddish orange. Just really subtle. Let the feet have soft edges. You can leave them partially, incomplete. You can have some soft edges in there. While we're here working in these under layers, you can come back into some of that homemade black and you can redefine the duck's eye a little bit. Pull in that nostril. With our underpainting on and some oranges blocked in, it's time to dry our painting and pull on the white of the duck. I'm going to touch up my greens where my thumb smudged them first. And then let's grab those blow dryers and give this a blast. We are going to be working into some pure white colors here. So for our two middle value colors for this duck, we'll refer to these ones as our warmer creamy colors and these ones as our cooler creamy colors, the more purple one. Make sure you have some pure white on your palette. We'll add some white, but we'll also need to use some of our shadow colors to integrate the whites that we put in here. There are some different brushes we can use for our highlighting. I'm going to show you what I mean when I say integrating, so you can kind of get the idea of the fundamental technique and then focus in on your painting and just refer back to the image for where any of the shadow and mid-tone values are. Let me quickly point out a highlight, shadow, and mid-tone in this image. So if you feel lost, you can just look here. So we're getting into the whites, and look here, highlight. Highlight here is the pure white. This pure white mixes into this warmer middle value. That's this cream color, which is essentially this color here. So when I added the white, I had to add a bit more of the middle value, this cream color. You see the cream color here, here, a little bit in like the cheek area to help integrate the highlights. So this cream color is the middle value. And then the shadows are the cooler middle values, the purples, kind of mixing with the blue grays at the darkest part under the wing here, in here. So always look and ask yourself, is it a shadow? Is it a middle value, or is it a white highlight? And we're just going to use these colors along with the white to help naturalize or integrate the transition. The brushes that I like to use most at this part of the painting are brushes like the mini fan here, which you can see has lovely texture right in the brush. A 1/4 inch flat, which you can create kind of individual feather clusters with. And you can use a brush like a whisk brush like this, which has prongs in it, also to create kind of big marks. And the individual prongs can make it look like it has in like smaller feathers within the clusters of highlights. So here we go. It can be nice to add a little water to your white at this point. Just kind of helps it flow. So in my face, I want to think about the light coming from the top. So I might take this brush, and I've added a bit of water to the paint to help it flow. And I'm going to come along the top of the head here. I'm going to let it get dark again around the eye. I'm going to bring in some white in here like this. And even some white kind of coming down the neck and into the front of the chest where there's a lot of these whiter highlights. But if I just leave it like this or try to use just the white, it's going to all turn white. So to make this a smooth transition, I need to clean up my brush a bit and then go into a bit of the light warm cream color, like the lightest one here. And I'm going to use just a little bit of that to kind of transition. And it's a light touch. You can even add some water to some of this color. I'm just going to feather right over top. Maybe using a bit of a darker creamy color at the top of the wing here. Under the neck, I might come back into some of that pretty purple blue color. I put a little bit of that color in wet, but I want to use some of the surrounding paint to kind of soften it together. Maybe adding a little more wet purple over top. So it kind of looks a bit more blended and natural. And I keep doing this until I have some nice pure whites on there. So into the head. I want that little area kind of under the neck. I'm going to go into some of the purple middle value. And I might use it to just kind of create that shadow under the chin here. And that area around the eye. So see how it's really soft now? And now I can go in even. With some pure white, really thick, like right here. And make it even brighter. Okay, it's kind of like a light color down the back of the neck, but not pure white. And then the chest here, because the light's coming from this side, it's gonna get kind of really white there. And I can even pull a few little feathers out. This is a really fluffy duck. And notice that the color at the back of the neck here, instead of pure white, I've gone for more of a kind of darker, warm middle value here. I'm going to use that more yellowy white to transition the feathers from the pure white here, where we're going under the wing. And it's still pretty light here. But it's under the wing, so it's not quite pure white. And there's still some of those shadows, some of those purples or blues. We have a layer. I'm just going to maybe lighten it just a little bit. Make it blend in with the whites and creams of the breast here. And then, so the wing itself is casting a bit of shadow, so middle values. Then at the tip of the tail, it's getting really white again. So I might come into some white and just go with one. Oops. That was a really aggressive fluff, but it doesn't look bad, right? It's just a very fluffy duck. Which I'm okay with. Let's do the same thing with the wing. And this isn't the final whites. We kind of mix the whites with the shadows slowly in this layer, letting some of the underpainting show through. I've been using that little whisk brush, but I want to show you can use the fan brush too. It's also fabulous. I'm just going to load the tip, and I'm going to start with the white because the wing is The light's coming from above and this way, so it's really catching a lot of light. A bit of shadow here where the neck's kind of blocking some light. But we're going to have little feathers, you know. You can let the underpainting show through. You know, it's kind of just coming over the body. I might take a bit of that more yellow color and just kind of slowly blend it in. We don't want it to be a super harsh line. Like, these are forms, but they're all still connected, right? So we don't want it to look too disjointed. So I just used a bit of the warm yellow to soften the shoulder in, letting it stay a bit darker down there for now. Going back into the white. So down here, these are kind of little feathers. We've got that little shadow in between. And then once again, we can kind of like whoop, really wing those out. Right now, there's some really dark contrast in my shadows, which is okay, but the overall painting is soft. I'm just going to scrub some of the white off. Maybe I've mixed some of this purpley gray blue into my cooler middle value, just for an in-between color. So we could soften this just a little. Probably could have even just used some light yellow there. I'm going to wipe my brush. I'm going to add some more white on these little shoulders here. A little more white in the chest here. And I could leave that shadow. It's actually a pretty nice value, but if you wanted to tweak yours at all, you just go in for one of those cooler colors. And so see how doing little brush strokes and having those darker colors underneath can really create this soft feathery form without having to think about individual feathers. Just think about kind of how they curve and flow around the body. And now take a peek at your whites and your shadows. You can really lay on the white quite thick. Like, you could even go impasto here where you can see thick texture. And I kind of did on the cheek here. Like, I took a fairly large glob of white and I really highlighted there. You can add pretty thick white on the chest, so you can take a pretty big glob, right? Just have fun with it. And to finish the duck, I like to just look at, I want to add a highlight in the eye. I also like to tweak the beak. So remember, we added a little white into some of the orange. So make sure that at the top of the beak, where the direct light source is hitting, it's going to be a little lighter there. Okay, remember we have that kind of triangle of darker orange here. It's all good. And then the feet, they're mostly in shadow, so I might just add a bit more orange there, and some of the orange that has orange red that has the green in it. I didn't do anything fancy with the feet. I see Lisa, who's working on another project today but popped in to say hello, says, since I've started using the fan brush more, I really like the texture it makes. I think it's really good at loosening up, Lisa. I feel the same way. It kind of, I remember just one painting I started, was too lazy to grab another brush. It was, you know, sometimes you have a lot of focus for your paintings and you clean brushes and switch. And then sometimes you're like a kamikaze and you're too lazy to wipe things off. And sometimes that makes a horrible mess. But for me, I was using my fan brush in a way I'd never done before, and it loosened me up so much. So I started challenging myself sometimes to do a painting with just a fan brush, a small painting with just a fan brush. It can be really fun for loosening up by choosing just one big brush and exploring how many marks it can make. Because even a big fan brush, like we did around the body of the goose, if you attempted to use this brush with me, if I load just the tip of this brush, I can make a really small line. You can push up, pull down, tap with the tip. Don't get me started on this brush. It is definitely a fave. Tweak the beak, and when you're ready, the finishing touch. If you're like me, you may have gotten some of your fur color into the duck's eye. So I'm just going to put some of the black in there. And I had the eye round, but I kind of like the way it's curving over the cheek here. I think it looks quite cute. So I'm going to keep that. I'm going to take a small round brush like a 0 or a 1. And let's go into the white. And we'll just right towards the top. Boop, a little highlight to bring him to life. What a cutie. You could have the painting finished here. I think it's already got everything, a background, a subject, shadows, and all that. But I wanted to make this a little spring wonderland. So if you want to continue keeping on with me, we're going to add a few expressive painterly style flowers and a few quick expressive dragonflies as well. And we're going to do these in a way, just like with the duck, we let the brush do the work. It's very few layers. So let me show you a few of the flower forms that I like to use. I did all of my flowers with one brush called a 1/4 inch flat. You can get these long handle or short handle. And one of my favorites, if you live in North America, you can find this brand called Artist Loft. I also have quite a few of these by Winsor & Newton and Princeton as well, but they're just little rectangular brushes. And I use some pure white, and I also use some pinks. And just like our greens and our blues, we're going to be mixing some of our sepia color into these pinks to make them less of a saturated color and more of a neutral landscape color. Let me show you these two pinks. So here's cadmium red, medium hue mixed with white. Pretty, very saturated. If I add a little bit of that burnt sienna, it's going to make it more of a neutral pink, like this. Same thing when I do the magenta, which is more of a purple pink. And if you're running out of white and you have some of this creamy color left, this is basically just the sienna plus white. So here's my magenta mixed with some white and some of the sienna color. So it's just a bit more of a slightly different rosy pink. So I like using these pinks mixed with some brown. If you have less white, it will be darker. If you add more white, you can make more pastel versions of this color. You can add lots of white into whatever color you mix, just add a little more white. And then you can go for both dark and light flowers. And we'll go with the ones that have some brown in them. These are little daisies. And if we think about the flower, if we do a circle shape, it's like a flower from the front. If we think of more of an oval shape, it's kind of like a flower from the side. And if we take an oval shape like this, and I do a little curve in it, like this, it kind of looks like a cup that's facing up. And then the center of the flower is here. So what this means is the petals on the inside of the cup are kind of facing away, and then these ones are kind of pointing up. So here we have kind of like a little flower facing up. And when I do that with paint, I just do it really quickly. So I create the kind of oval shape, and then you can come in with some of those back petals and some of those front petals. And we can put a little center in the middle of the flower. So they're just really expressive, and I just pull the marks in this general shape. And I do most of my daisies like that, including some different colors, pinks. So kind of like just a little oval shape where it curves up at the bottom. Now we can kind of tilt this to the side where we have the petals like this and the center of the flower right here. If we want it to look more like it's facing the front, then instead of an oval shape, it's kind of more of like a circle shape where all the petals come into the middle. And then the center of the flower is in the middle. The flower is either on the side like an oval, or front on where it's like a circle. Now we don't have our grid anymore, and you can put your flowers anywhere you want. But if you happen to like the place where I have set some of my flowers, let's just look for some relationships. So if we start with some of these darker pink ones, kind of got this line of flowers coming in the shadow area here. And I might even just add a little water to my color. And the lowest one kind of sits. I'm going to start here and work up, kind of just in line with the feet, but over a little bit. Kind of do some little dots, like a little oval shape. Then you can pull your petals in or out. And then here's a little bowl shape. Maybe change the angle, the little circle, and then pull the other way. And it can look nice to take some lighter pink into the petals along the bottom. So I've got this little row of flowers here. And I'm going to do a really light pink one and then a white daisy. I'm going to make kind of a little oval shape, and then I'm going to flick some petals out. A light pink one. I'm going to go into some white, maybe do a little daisy. And then I have kind of a white one right close to the chest about here. This one's almost like a front facing one where the petals kind of come out all around. And then this little angle kind of above the feet, I've got 3 little flowers. This one's almost like a flower facing up, where that's kind of like an upside down arc where the petals are kind of coming down. And then the center of the flower is like on top like this. We're going to have 3 coming down with one like an arc like this. And I'm going to use that burnt sienna color with a bit more yellow in it for the center of the flowers. I have kind of a whitish one up here. Maybe some of this creamy color. the dark center. And then I've got some little yellow ones where I took some cadmium yellow and I added a little bit of the burnt sienna and a little bit of white. I just wanted it to be a little bit more of a pale brownish yellow. So this is white and cadmium yellow. I wanted kind of a medium yellow like this. And I did add a little bit of burnt sienna just to make it more of a neutral landscape color. So white and yellow, again, adding a bit of the brown. Kind of like a buttercup color. And when I have my color, I'm going to add a little water to it. And for these little guys, I just did either circle or oval shapes made up of smaller circle or oval shapes like this. So if I did a more of an oval, it would be kind of like this. And then I put the darker brown in the middle. So really just simple shapes. Maybe just do a few kind of, here's the light area, and I just did a few kind of in this space here. Could even use that yellowy burnt sienna color. I like the one with the white. Okay, so I'm just going to do a few small little flowers here. I'm trying some with the more yellow burnt sienna with just a little white too. Almost just like some little dabs just to loosen it up. And even like a little dab like this, if I put a dark center in it, it starts to look like a abstract kind of flower. Now with one of your darker pinks, like the magenta with some of the sienna color, add a little bit of water to this, or a lot of water. I did a little bit of splattering towards the tops of some of these flowers. So just integrating a bit more texture. To splatter, you want your paint like as runny as maple syrup. And I use this mixture of magenta and burnt sienna, or this dark pink. Because like this color we made here, I've just added a bit more magenta and brown to make it darker. Any dark rosy pink, so red with some brown in it. And you can take a brush, like a whisk brush, and dip the tip in. And I want to have my dragonflies here, but along the edge of some of these taller grasses, you can just create a little texture here, like some little multi-stem flowers. And you can even pull some little bits of this texture down, maybe right here. I'm just kind of integrating these colors all over. And I pulled some in with a whisk brush, but I splattered some on as well. And to splatter, we take a brush, like a bright brush, like one of these. And we dip it into this really runny paint. It has to be runny like maple syrup. So watch how runny. So see it squeeze out there? I'll do it again. Bloop. It is watery, dark pink. And if I hold it far away, it will splatter over my whole painting. But if I hold it just an inch or two away from this flower, and I'm going to pull the bristles back, it's going to splatter just in that area. So I just did a little of this pink splatter up the side here and over my flowers. Just creates this fun, expressive look. Spend some time with these flowers and have fun making it look really spring-like. And when you're ready, it's time to add some little dragonflies. I added 5 dragonflies. They're really quite small, but the general shape is a little body like this. And then the wings come out really close to the head. And there's an upper wing like this. And the lower wing, so both wings come out in the top half of the body. The lower wing might come out like this, angle in, and then curve. And if I make the wings a little bit smaller on the side that's away from us, like this, it looks like it's turned. To do this in paint, and really small, I just pulled on the little body like this. And I used white, but of course the white won't show up on the paper, so I'll use a darker cream color. Then I made that same shape with just a little brush, like this. And I made the wings a little bit bigger on one side and a little bit smaller on the other side. I did some different colors for their bodies. I did a yellowish brown, kind of like that sepia color, a blue one, a green one, like he's like curious. He's like body's arched, like he's looking up at this little guy. This little tiny one so far away, a yellow one, and then a blue one. So I have 3 over here, 2 over here. You can put yours wherever you like. I'm going to come up into this kind of sepia color. Has a bit more yellow in it. And I want to kind of make sure I can fit the wings. So I'm almost like kind of tracing the wing shapes on to make sure I can fit them in here first. And then I'm going to do just a little angle to the body. A little head like this. And we'll go into some white. And wing, wing, and make them a little smaller on the opposite side. And sometimes I add more white after it dries. Here's one little guy. I'm going to use some of my homemade blue black, maybe make sure I have enough room for, the wings. And a little body. Rinse. I'm using my 0 round here, by the way. The nice little detail brush. And then once again, remember those wings come up from above the halfway point. Wing, wing, 2 little ones on the other side. These might dry a little darker as the water evaporates, so I might need to darken them. And I'm going to take some of my dark green. I definitely want a little one kind of looking at the duck, like a very curious little dragonfly right here. They're going to be spring friends, or maybe the duck is going to eat the dragonfly. I made the wings a little smaller on the inside to make him look like he's turned a little bit. This is my favorite part. I've never had ducks, but oh my gosh, they are so cute. And I know they eat bugs in the garden. I'm sure they're a lot of work, but also probably some of the most delightful farm animals that you can have. So I'm going to do some wings here. And this little guy. And then one more up here. You do not have to paint these as fast as I am. This is my third time painting this duck, so I know where I want my stuff to go. I want you to take your time. I'm just trying to keep the lessons concise. So you place those dragonflies wherever you like. They're the last element. Oh, except for this little branch. Now's the time where we can do final tweaks into the foliage. I like to place the dragonflies before this branch just to make sure that it still fits. And now we can add a few little stems into the flowers, like if you want to connect a few of these to a light or medium green stem. And we can add this pretty little branch, which was just so much fun to do. I went for the darker, not the shadow green, but the dark value green, which was just green plus the sienna, maybe a little extra yellow. And we're going to use a brush called a script liner. Like the splatter technique, using the script liner requires a lot of water to go into the paint. So we want it as runny as maple syrup. If you can't get your script liner to work, it's because it needs more water. So let me show you this brush. I've just cleaned it off. It's got a really long bristle and it wants to soak up the paint. If the paint is the consistency of toothpaste and you touch the brush to it, it won't soak anything up. Here's the best way to use this brush. Wet the brush, then dip it into your watery paint, and it will just soak that water right up. Practice on some scrap paper if you like, but you want to be able to do a thin line. This holds so much water that you can do quite a few little lines. Just practice with any new brushes you get. See what they can do. We can tap it for texture, but today we're going to use it for a long, thin line like this. And then we'll add a few little leaves, leafy shapes coming down, getting bigger towards the bottom of the painting. I'm going to start here. Going to put on my little line. And then let's switch to a brush like our angled shader. And if I lay this brush, this little angled shader on like this, it just makes really quick and easy leaf marks. And so I've got the tip pointing up and then I'm pulling towards the the plant and getting smaller little leaf shapes as we go down. So some bigger leaf shapes here. And smaller towards the end. I'm going to take a few of these lighter middle greens and maybe just do a few little, with the script liner too, maybe just do a few little lines through any of the, now we can really assess the negative space here around the flowers, and maybe pull a few little grasses over the feet. So you can look at your painting, see if there's any areas of space that you feel might really need something to pull it all together. These are all the steps to this painting. You can add stuff, leave stuff out. Take this for the techniques and the foundational aspects of the lesson, and then apply them in your own way. Do whatever you need to do to make your painting work on paper. Even when I paint the same thing twice, I have to adjust things differently. My shadows and underpainting will always be slightly different. Even my energy and my mood is different, which is going to affect how I blend things together, how I work with the colors we put down. So I have the same colors in the sky, but because they're arranged differently, I might blend them differently. You might have different brush preferences or style preferences, and lean into those. I say that because the goal of the painting isn't to make it look just like mine. The goal of these tutorials is I try to break down techniques like using a grid, using an underpainting, using basic shapes to draw, splatter painting. We talk a little bit about color temperature. So if you picked up 1 or 2 new tips and tricks about painting, consider that a success, not to make it look just like mine. I have my own style, and I've been painting for over 25 years. So I want you to use these paintings for your own education and to develop your own artistic sensibilities and preferences. Now, when you're finished this painting, I really hope you enjoyed working on this cheerful spring duck and really spending some time exploring these really loose and impressionistic style brush mark in combination with a bit more detail within the duck. We've worked with color and texture in this meadow, and I think scenes like this are a really wonderful reminder that not every painting needs to be highly detailed all over the place to feel alive. Sometimes letting areas like the feet have less detail, or working with pattern, texture, and color variation, and simply changing value can really change our work and create a sense of movement and atmosphere that in this case, I think feels quite joyful. Now, if you're watching this class during its free viewing period, and all of my regular classes are free for a whole week, you can come back and visit at any time for the next 7 days. If you'd like to keep this particular lesson for lifetime access, you can tip to own it on my website for just a few bucks, and again, that gives you lifetime access. Plus, I label my color mixing guide for you to refer to. Or you can consider joining Kick Academy, as this class goes into the Kick Academy Vault with over 650 other detailed tutorials like this. I have classes that are more beginner friendly, where we just cover 1 or 2 techniques in the lesson. I try to cover a wide range of styles and subjects, as well as difficulty levels for you to enjoy. As a Kick Academy member, don't forget this is now in your library and ready to revisit anytime you're ready to paint it, though I highly encourage you to paint it now as we're heading into the spring season. Now, when you're finished, I love getting to see your finished paintings. I look at every single painting that's posted. There's an album on my website for every single painting, so you can upload it there, or you can join our Facebook sharing group. It's another wonderful community full of painters. You can share your painting into albums there as well. And I just love seeing how each of your paintings bring their own unique interpretation. Well, that's it for me. I'll be back next weekend. What are we painting next weekend? We have, some adorable kissing bunnies for our sketchbook challenge members. And for our next free live class, we are going to be adding to our lighthouse series and painting a beautiful blue, teal, and full of cherry blossom lighthouse to continue that series we've been working on. All right, that's it for me. Take care. Have a wonderful week ahead. And until next time, I hope you keep it colorful. Bye.